Rishus Mayrav Rabbi Sai. I'd like to begin by thanking the Agudath Iisrael of America, Daf Yomi Commission, for giving me this opportunity to share these inyanim with you. Another thing I'd like to mention is the Siyum Hashas was over 2 years ago. And we all know that on a regular basis, in every cycle of Daf Yomi, there's the famous joke of Ba Shabbos Ba Menucha. So many people get inspired by the Siyum Hashas. So many people walk out saying they're going to learn Daf Yomi, they're going to start. And then as the Meseches go on, as the years go on, what happens? More and more people slowly drop away. They have a difficult time keeping it up. And yet I think in this cycle we're seeing a beautiful phenomena. I think watching what's going on out there, how many more shiurim have began. One share is offering free gemaras to anybody who begins. I think for the first time in our history, in Klal Yisrael's history, in over the 100 years of doing that, approximately 100 years of doing Daf Yomi, we're seeing that as the cycle continues, not that people are dropping out and fewer people are doing Daf Yomi, but through all these programs of chizuk, to mechazik at the beginning of each Masechta, at the end of each Masechta, we are seeing such a beautiful growth of Leimdei Torah, of Leimdei Daf Yomi, of people who are taking it upon themselves to make sure to have a Seder HaLimud every single day in Gemara, and that's something that's such a beauty to watch, and such a Kvod Shemayim. Tonight we're here to celebrate the end of Meseches Megillah, to make a Siyum on Meseches Megillah. Tonight's daf, tomorrow's daf, Thursday's daf, is the Gemara Megillah daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, V'Omer Rabbi Shaftaya, Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Shaftaya says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Asara shekoru ba'Torah. When you have 10 people reading from the Torah, Hagodol shebehem goyel sefer Torah. Who goes Galila? Who's the goyel? Which we'll say later. Today is the one who's going Agba. Who is the Magbiyah? The Godel shebekulam. And then the Gemara continues, Hagoyloi noitel schar kulan. The Goyloi not only is the greatest one who goes Galila, but he is Mekabel schar kulam. The Amr Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Asara shekoru ba'Torah. 10 people are reading from the Torah. Hagoyel sefer Torah kibul schar kulan. The Goyel sefer Torah receives the schar of all of them. That's what it seems like. But the Gemara asks, schar kulan sakadaitoch, could it be that those who got an aliyah don't get schar, but the one who goes Hagba is going to get the schar for everybody? El Eimor zok the Gemara kibel schar kineged kulam. His schar of going Hagba is the equivalent to the schar of all those who got an aliyah. And it's a very difficult to understand. So Tosfos says, Lefishu kvoide v'gam lefishu godel shebekulam kedai hu litos schar kineged kulam. Tosfos tells us who went Hagba, the godel shebekulam. They looked around, and it's a machloikis if it meant the godel of those 10 people. Who's the 10 people the Rishonim say? The 7 people who got the aliyahs, the 8th from Maftir, the Gabbai, and the Balkaira. You always had 10. Some say it's one of those who always went Hagba, and others learn it's the godel in the Beis HaKnesses gets Hagba. The Baal Iter says, Ikeman de Omer Asara Lav Davka El Godel Shebe Beis HaKnesses. They would give the Godel Shebe Beis HaKnesses, and therefore he was Mekabel Schar Kineged Kulam because he deserved it. It is said over that the Goyin used to get an aliyah every Shabbos and also Hagba. And even when he was an Ovel and didn't get an aliyah, but to show his chavivus for the Sefer Torah, he still went Hagba. The Atera Zekanim says, "U'mekol mokim nochen legodel hayodea lizoher bedinei glila lahamed ala tefer v'liglo mibachutz lahatke mibifnim." Why did they give the godel shebekulam? Why would he get Hagba? He got Hagba because he knew the halachas of Hagba, because he knew how to treat a Sefer Torah with the proper kavod HaTorah. That is what we're here tonight, what we're going to discuss. Kavod HaTorah, kavod for a Sefer Torah. The Mishnah Meseches Avos Perik Vav Mishnah Dalet says, Rabbi Yossi Yomer Kol HaMechabed Es HaTorah, anyone who's mechabed the Torah, gufoi mechabed ala briyos. his guf will be mechubed by briyos. V'chol mechalas HaTorah chas v'sholem, the other way around. And there's different ways to understand the Mishnah. But the Rambam in Hilchos Stam in Perik Yud Alocha Yud Aleph says, Kol misha yoyshev lifnei Sefer Torah. Anyone who is sitting in front of a Sefer Torah, yeshev, he has to sit b'kovid roish be'ema v'fachad. The Rambam says a person who's sitting when the Sefer Torah is out has to sit with kovid roish, with a level of awe, of earnestness, of reverence for the Sefer Torah. Is that what we do every time the Sefer Torah is out? But this is what the Rambam says. And why is it so important? The Rambam says, Shehu ha'eid ha'ne'eman l'chol ba'ei olam. Our Sefer Torah is our aid to everybody in the world. As the Pasuk says, V'hoyu shamucha aid. That the Torah is our connection. It's our aidus to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's our aidus to Briyas ha'olam. And therefore, v'chabdehu, the Rambam says, Kefi koichai. Every person, Kefi koichai, has to be mechabe the Sefer Torah. And then the Rambam quotes this Mishnah that we said before from others. Omru chacham harishonim kol mechabeles HaTorah gufay mechul ala briyos, but v'chol mechabedes HaTorah gufay mechubed ala briyos. You see the importance of showing kavod for a Sefer Torah. And it's very interesting. The Meiser Rekeach says this on the Rambam. Kol zel limdu rabbeinu, the Rambam learned the halachas of kavod from a Sefer Torah me'am Meseches Seifrim. V'shom bi'aru oid kamed dvarim hanoigim l'kavod ha-Sefer Torah. The Meiser Rekeach says, look in Mesechtes Seifrim to know how to be mechaber the Sefer Torah. Shekol ha-mechabdoi u'mahadroi. Anyone who's mechaber the Sefer Torah, who's mahader a Sefer Torah, hari kibed es Hashem. You're being mechaber HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem hanichbod v'hanoyer Baruch Hu v'ashrei loi manoim garoloi ashrei yom shekocheloi ashrei yom sh'Hashem eloi kav. If we want to show kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world, the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us a Sefer Torah. We're mechaber the Rebbeinu Shalom when we're mechaber the Sefer Torah. And Rachmana litzlan fakert, if we're not mechaber the Sefer Torah, we're being mevaza HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Think of it. Someone gets an heirloom from a mishpacha, from a great-grandparent or whatever it is, or today they have these auctions for these items from various gedolim and rebbes, and people spend a lot of money on it, and they sit and they look, and it reminds them of the gadol, or if it's a family heirloom, it reminds them of where it comes from. How much more so the Sefer Torah? It has to remind us where we come from. It reminds us that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave it to us. You mechaber the Torah, you mechaber the Rebbeinu Shalom. But treating a Sefer Torah with kavod, how do we treat a Sefer Torah with kavod? So we're all used to, we take out the Sefer Torah, we run, we kiss it, go back to our seat, we know we have to keep quiet during Krias HaTorah, but there really is so much more. And in order to know how to be mechaber the Sefer Torah, you have to know the halachas. Like similarly, kavod ha-meis. We all can relate to that. And if we all had to write our own rules for how to be mechaber the meis, I don't know if we would go with a simple pine box, with simple white tachrichim, but we know kavod ha-meis is not what we think kavod ha-meis should be, influenced by Western culture and Western society. But kavod ha-meis is what Chazal told us. And the same thing for kavod ha-Torah. If we want how to be mechaber the Torah, we have to learn Hilchos Krias HaTorah. We have to learn the halachas of what to do when a Sefer Torah is taken out. We have to know how to treat a Sefer Torah. When could you take out a Sefer Torah? When do you take out a second Sefer Torah? When do you put back a Sefer Torah? When could you travel with a Sefer Torah? If we don't know the halachas, then we can't be mechaber it the way Chazal told us is real, true kavod ha-Torah. Right? The Shulchan Aruch brings some of the halachas, but not many. Ephraim Zal Margolius the Shari Ephraim, he lived in the mid-1700s. He put together beautiful sefer on how to be mechabed the Torah. Tzvi Hirsch Krasinski said on it that it's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai of Krias HaTorah. So now we're going to try to go through some of the basics of Krias HaTorah, some things which get lost, which maybe would be a chesaron in our kavod ha-Torah. And not just that. It's so important for every person to know this on their fingertips. Because what comes up during Krias HaTorah is very unique compared to other halachas. In Hilchos Nida, in Hilchos Basar B'chalav, and usually in Hilchos Shabbos, if a shayla comes up, you can call a Rav. On Shabbos, you could walk down the street to the Rav. So rarely do we have a shayla that we need a psak instantly, that either we're going to do what's right now, or we're not. You put away the food, you wait till you get a shaila. If you had a shaila in the oven, you had a shaila, you wait. You call a Rav, you call another Rav. But how often does a shaila come up during Krias HaTorah and we look around, especially if the Rav is not there, and nobody knows what to do, and they guess. But if we, like we said, if you don't treat the Sefer Torah with proper covet, kafi halacha, then you're not being mechabed the Sefer Torah. Baruch Hashem, that's why, one reason why we were zeicher to put out the Shari Ephraim, adapted in English, the laws and customs of Krias HaTorah now. Why? So that people should be able to know the halachas. People today should be able to learn it easily, should know when something comes up in shul what to do. Because there's no time to ask, and it's an instant whether we're mechabed the Sefer Torah or we're not. So we'll start with the beginning. Right, we get up to Psicha by Krias HaTorah. So we opened our Kodesh, and most places can say Brich Shemei should be recited while the Sefer Torah is still in the Aron. And we take out the Sefer Torah, and the person when Psicha hands it to the Chazan. He's mechuyev to be malava. The halacha tells us he should be malava, he should show covet to the Sefer Torah, not just hand it off to the Chazan and walk back to his seat. But he should be malava the Sefer Torah back to all the way to the bima. Not a little bit, all the way to the bima. He should be malava the Sefer Torah. And in fact, the Shari Ephraim tells us that the minig once upon a time was that when the two Sefer Torah were taken out, on one of the Arba Parshiyas or Yom Tiv, the person when Psicha took out the first Sefer Torah and he handed it to the Chazan. And he was malava that Sefer Torah, that Chavivas. And only a second person took out the second Sefer Torah. Today many don't have that minig. But at least when you go Psicha, you have to make sure to walk all the way back to the bima, behind the Chazan. Brich Shemei, the proper time to say it is before the Chazan begins Gadlu or Shema Yisrael. But if not, you could say it all the way until the Sefer Torah is open for the Kriya. If you didn't have a chance to say it, then the place can say you could say it again during Hagbah. It's also the proper time. But what happens if it comes Rish Chodesh or Tainus or something happens and you take out the wrong Sefer Torah? What do you do now? So the Machzik Bracha, the Chidah says, Dim Haitziu Sefer Torah she'ene galul im kaimai. If you took out a Sefer Torah that wasn't rolled to the proper place, ein lahachziroi la'aron lahaitzi acheres. You should not take out a second one. Sheniglal that's rolled to the right place. Mishum pegam ha-Sefer Torah. It's not covered out Torah. It looks like there is something wrong with this Sefer Torah. There's a pegam in it. And therefore the Chidah says you should use that Sefer Torah, even though you're going to have to be goyelet, and there will be some techet tzibura. The halacha tells us on a regular time, it's a gabai's job to make sure that the Sefer Torah is rolled to the right place. There shouldn't be techet tzibura. But zak the Chidah, it looked like a begam in the Sefer Torah, and therefore you should roll it to the right place. Ramosha, Nigris Moshe, or Chaim Chelik Beisim in Lamed Zayin says that you have to know your crowd. He said, and you have to know how far you have to roll. He says if it's going to be a long while to roll, and people are going to be makbid, and people are going to start kvetching, you can have a bigger bizayin HaTorah going on when the Sefer Torah is out, so you can put it back and take out another one. But if it's close by and you can be goyelet, Ramosha says Avada, one should go with the Chidah, and one should not put back a Sefer Torah. And as the Sefer Torah is being carried to the bima, like we said, the person who went Psicha follows it. But everybody else also should try to walk up and kiss it. And if you're too far away, you can't get there, at least walk a couple of steps towards the Sefer Torah to show kavod. And it's brought down that even the women in the women's section should walk up towards the mechitza. They should walk up towards the Sefer Torah to show their chavivas, to want to be close to the Sefer Torah. That's what you have to do. And once a person is called up for an aliyah and the Sefer Torah is put down, the person has known he's called up for the Sefer Torah, he has to go up quickly. The shortest distance it says a person should go to show his chavivas HaTorah, but he also has to be careful not to run. Not to do something that's going to create people laughing in shul or smiling or catcalls or other things like that. You have to go up like a mensch, quickly, but like a mensch. You have to make sure you see where in the Sefer Torah the Kriya is going to begin. And then you make the bracha. This is a machlekes ha-paiskim if you showed the wrong place, depending if it was on that amud, if it was somewhere else. You have to know the halachas, when you have to make another bracha, when you don't make another bracha. And then, how do you make the bracha on the Sefer Torah? So there's two different minhagim, the Mechaber, the Ramah, and you have to know what your minhag is. Some people close the Sefer Torah while they're making the bracha and hold the Eitz Chaim with both hands together, They hold up, they've lifted a little bit. Show chavivas to the Sefer Torah. Right? Others hold, that Ramah says, mashma, others hold that you leave the Sefer Torah open. It shouldn't be Teched Tzibur to have to find a place again. But Zakter Ramah, you should turn your head to the left, which is the Yemin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as you say the bracha. But on the other hand, one should also know. That's if you could say it by heart. But what happens if you don't know the brachas well? And now you're going to make a mistake in the brachas, and they have it nicely printed next to the Sefer Torah. Avad the Ramah would say it's better to look inside and get the brachas properly than to mix up the brachas and not say it right. That's all part of Kavod Sefer Torah. Kavod HaTorah is that you can't lean when you get an aliyah. Except it says that if it's a tall Sefer Torah, in order to read along, you have to read the top, you have to lean, so then with the Evid you can lean. But a person should be standing straight when he gets an aliyah. The Balkaira, the Oila, shouldn't be leaning. And you have to make sure to read along quietly, to say every word along with the Balkaira, but also not make sure it's quietly, not too loud, that other people are going to hear two voices at once coming from one spot and not going to hear the Balkaira. So you have to read along, but you have to read along properly. Then for the bracha afterwards, the minhag is that we close the Sefer Torah. And we also, with two hands, you hold the Eitz Chaim, and you show your chavivas. And then we all know the famous minhag that we all tell the person that he has to stand till the following aliyah by the bima. Where does that come from? So if you look in this forum, it seems like originally, in large shuls and small aisles, that the halacha tells us that the person coming up for the next aliyah has to come up before you go down. If there's only space for one, the person coming up goes up. And we were worried that by the time you get back to your seat, the person for the previous aliyah is going to miss the beginning of the kriya, won't make it back to the seat on time. So it became the minhag that he stays at the bima until after the following aliyah, and that is the standard minhag today in Klal Yisrael. And after all the aliyahs are done, and we get up to Hagbah. So you have to send a person up who can do Hagbah. It's not a Kavod HaTorah to send up somebody who can't really, and you put someone standing next to him and the Sefer Torah is shaking. That's not Kavod HaTorah. Kavod HaTorah is that someone who can lift the Sefer Torah properly. He goes up for Hagbah and he lifts it up. And the proper way of doing Hagbah is, really you're supposed to lift the Sefer Torah closed and then open it up to 3 columns. If one can't, or one's worried, then avada you could lift it up after it's open, which is the standard minhag that many people do, because they're worried. And obviously, chas v'sholom, a Sefer Torah to shake or to drop, that's the biggest lack of Kavod HaTorah. We don't have to talk about that. But the person who went Hagbah, now he sits down with the Sefer Torah. Ramosha speaks against those shuls of once upon a time that would make in the bench wooden holes to leave the Sefer Torah. You finish getting Hagbah, you put it down, you walk away. Chas v'sholom, Ramosha says, you hold the Sefer Torah. The place can say you shouldn't even give it to somebody else to hold. If you have chavivus for that Sefer Torah, you hold on to that Sefer Torah. Why are you looking to give it away? Is this not the Rabbeinu Shalom's Torah? You have to sit and hold the Sefer Torah and show chavivus for that Torah. Now, obviously, there's exceptions. If a person has to do something, a person is the gabbai and he went Hagbah. But otherwise, there's no good reason. The person who went Hagbah has to make sure to sit and hold the Sefer Torah and show chavivus for the Sefer Torah. The place can say not to even let it sit on the bench like the bottom of the Eitz Chaim, but to hold it with chavivus. And then after the Makbiyah goes and gives the Sefer Torah to the Chazan, just like the one who in Psicha has to follow it, he also should follow all the way back to the Aron Kodesh. Not just hand it off to the Chazan and go back to his seat, but all the way to the Aron Kodesh he should go and show his chavivus. You malava a guest. You know, the whole sugi of Egla Arufa, because we weren't malava a guest. How much more so to be malava HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah? We have to be malava. And you were holding it. You handed it to the Chazan, but you walk all the way to the Aron HaKodesh. And once again, all those who it passes should walk up close and remain like that till it gets to the Aron HaKodesh. You can't all walk up to the Aron HaKodesh, but walk up a little bit and show your chavivas. That's some of the basics. And then comes up the shilas that come on a regular basis, and we'll talk about a few of them. What happens? A Gabe wants to give somebody an aliyah, somebody wants an aliyah, the middle of Psukei de Zimra, the middle of Hilchos Krias what happens? So obviously during Shemoneh Esrei, no one can get an aliyah. During Psukei de Zimra, Chatchila, no one should be called for an aliyah, except many poskim say if there's only one kohen and he's a milf Psukei de Zimra, he can get an aliyah. Hilchos Krias Shema, Rav poskim hold that even if it's the only kohen, he shouldn't be called up. Shaburas mashma, yes. Henkin says it's a machlokes. Every rav you have to consult your own rav, but you have to know what to do. I was standing in the shul recently, and they called up a kohen for an aliyah, and then they realized he's in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei. These shilas happen on the instant. When we mechabed Kavod HaTorah, and if a person is supposed to go and he doesn't go, it's a pegam in Kavod HaTorah. But if he's not supposed to go, then it's not a Kavod HaTorah to go. So you have to know those halachas. When can you go? When could you not go? What happens if you only lay in 2 psukim? We know if typical kriya is 10 psukim, with at least 3 for every aliyah. What happens? I got a call recently, it was Friday, Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh, and what happened? They realized afterwards that one aliyah was only 2 psukim. Do you have to go back and read the kriya or not? On a Shabbos, if it was one of the 7 kriyim, you'd have to go back. Even if you close the Sefer Torah and you put it back. On Monday and Thursday, poskim say you don't have to. But you have to know these halachas. What do you do on Monday and Thursday when there's more than one chiyuv? Someone just literally told me today they had that shaila. And someone said they should ask the kohanim to go out so they could have 3 aliyahs. We don't find that in the poskim to ask a kohen. There's covered for the kahuna, he gets the first aliyah, and there's halachas what to do when there's one chiyuv. Now if the kohanim want to go out and they want to make the gabai's life easier, there's no halacha that they can't go out on their own. But there's no halacha that you could make them go out or you could make them uncomfortable from staying. There's covered kahuna and there's what to do. Another interesting shiloh Moshe talks about, what happens if a bar mitzvah boy prepared the wrong parsha and all of a sudden it comes 2 weeks before the bar mitzvah, the week of the bar mitzvah, and they realize his birthday is the next week. What happens? Moshe says covered abrius comes first, covered Adam. The bezaynis for the family, the bezaynis for the bar mitzvah boy, could let him read it the Shabbos before his bar mitzvah. What happens if the wrong haftarah was read on Rosh Chodesh, or on Machar Chodesh and Erev Rosh Chodesh? You forgot, and he learned the regular haftarah. The halacha is, depends what happens. Depends when you realize. If you realize before the brachas, then you say it right away. If not, after the brachas, you repeat the haftarah without brachas. But you have to know what to do. These things come up on the instant. What happens if, like we had this year, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, we're going to have it Vayikra with 3 Sifrei Torah. What happens if it was done the wrong order? Which haftarah do you read? Do you read the last kriya like we usually do, or do you read the other one? These are all shilas that a person has to know. They come up on the instant. What happens to an aval who usually gets, like a rav, who usually gets an aliyah on a regular Shabbos? Is it avelus b'farhesia if he doesn't take an aliyah? It's covered HaTorah to give him an aliyah. He's the rav or whatever it is. You have to know what's the halacha. These things happen on an instant, and you have to know what the halacha is. Then, interestingly enough, when you recite Shehecheyanu, many people, when they get a new Sefer Torah, it's a huge simcha. By the first Krias HaTorah, they want to recite a Shehecheyanu. And there's a question amongst the poskim if you should or you shouldn't. Some say you should wear a new garment to recite the Shehecheyanu. And it's a Simchas HaTorah. The Machzik Bracha that Chidah says brings a moiradika thing that none of us would think to say on our own. The Machzik Bracha brings Heiras Echad Min HaGedolim. He says that he doesn't say the name. This is in Siman Reish Pei Beis Sivkot and Yodala. The Chidah says he brings, it was a psak from one of the Gedolim. The Misha Nodav Sefer Torah LeBeis HaKnesses. Someone who donated a Sefer Torah to a shul. V'koru boi bayayim ha-Shabbos ha-Rishon l'nesina. And they're reading it on the first Shabbos it's brought to shul. V'nimtza by toos. And you find a mistake in it. So the Chidah is bringing it from a gadol, and if he brings it from a gadol, it means he respects the person. He calls the person Echad Min HaGedolim. And he says, V'nimtza by toos, the gaimin by ha-Kriya. That even though you're not yaitza with apostle of Sefer Torah, and we didn't go into all those halachas, but you have to know when you put a Sefer Torah back, when you don't put a Sefer Torah back, because that's also covered out Torah. But here he's talking about a case where obviously otherwise you would put away the Sefer Torah. He says, this gadol says you finish it. The havalei kichoson, she'ein royim nigoy b'chupasai. The halacha is a kohen b'yayim chupasai. A person on the day of his chuppah, and he has a tzaras. There's a shayla of a tzaras, and we all know a person is not considered a mitzayra until the kohen paskins on him that he's a mitzayra. So such a person, b'yayim chupasai, a kohen does not paskin on him that he's a mitzayra. It's his chasana day. We let him have his simcha. So Zakta Machzik Bracha, Echad min Agudath says that covered Adam for this person who donated it. It's his Yom Chupaseh that's bringing the Sefer Torah that you don't pass the Sefer Torah and you could finish the Kriya. The Chidah finishes off and he disagrees and he says not to be Seimeh Chamis. But why does he bring it? He brings us to show us the importance of covered Adam. How many times in Shul are we happy to rush to correct the Baal Kairei, whether really he's mechuyev to be corrected or not mechuyev to be corrected? Right, the Aruch HaShulchan brings in Siman Kuf Mein Beis b'shem the Baal HaManig, dem To'ah HaKairei Oya Chazin. If the Baal Kairei or the Shliach Tzibur makes a mistake, Toiv Shaloi Lahagia Alav Al Shugigayisam Barab. The Baal HaManig says you never correct it. The Afal Pisha Ta Ba Yatzi De Kriya. He says you yaitze b'di'evet de Kriya even if there's a mistake. He says don't correct him because you're being mal ben ponov b'nei chaveroi. And if we're talking about covered HaTorah and covered for the Rebbeinu Shloim, what more does the Rebbeinu Shloim want than covered one yid to another yid? And therefore he brings the Baal HaManig not to make any corrections. And the Aruch HaShulchan asks on it and he disagrees la halacha. He says the Eich Shayach Leimer Shechayish in Halbonas Panim. How could you say we're worried about Halbonas Panim? Imatoyas hu beikar hamilo or betoli shemishtana inyan. If the mistake is something on a real word, on a word that is or that's pronounced wrong, that it means something else, how could it be? So the Aruch HaShulchan finishes it off and says you should only correct the Baal Kairei if it's a mistake that's mishtana inyan, not if it's trup. But we see from here, not just covered HaTorah, but the Rebbeinu Shalom demands us covered HaAdam. And if we show proper covered HaTorah and proper covered HaAdam, we can be Zeicha to Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mheira v'yameinu.